My goal for this video is to relay my experience playing the 5-year-old game Horizon Zero Dawn. This is of course in preparation for the sequel Forbidden West, and you may be in that exact same position where you see Forbidden West and it looks absolutely amazing, and you're hearing about it and you're curious, is your excitement for the sequel worth going back to the prequel Horizon Zero Dawn?
Oh boy.
First, I should say my general connection to the original game. I played about 6 hours initially when it first came out. I stopped at 6 hours because it felt to me obvious that this was a kind of open world that I had seen many times before. I was going to be going to bandit camps and clearing them out through light bits of stealth and various headshots. I was going to do fetch quests for different characters that I meet in small towns scattered throughout the landscape. I was going to hunt for resources. It felt like Far Cry, to be frank. And I didn't really want to play another game like that because I felt like I'd already done plenty of that, and that was the impression I was getting when I first played the game. Now, having gone back, I can say that there is actually a bit more to the game than that, and the kind of grind that this game facilitates is much more enjoyable than I even expected, but that was my first impression. That will probably be your first impression too if you go back to this game. Zero Dawn represents a kind of era of peak saturation of a certain type of open world game, like a kind of Ubisoft checklist. But of course, game releases over time shift. It's a kind of natural selection between the developers and the game players, where through feedback, developers begin to learn this works and this doesn't. What's funny about the original release of Horizon Zero Dawn is it came out a week before a kind of upending of open world structure in Zelda Breath of the Wild. Zelda Breath of the Wild is like the polar opposite of an Ubisoft title. There are no checklists generally to that game. There are of course things that you know that you can do and directions you know that you should go, but you are really following your curiosity, and there is so much discovery built into the essence of something like Breath of the Wild in a way that's very different than how Horizon structures its world. Horizon tells you what's around the corner before you get there. Horizon gives you the markers of locations so that you can have a plan ahead of time of what you're going to do. That is a pretty big difference. One failure of how the game presents itself is early on it shows you a lot of sci-fi elements. It shows you these past civilizations with their advanced technological structures mixed in with these more tribal, primitive civilizations. And my impression early on was that, okay, that means that there's going to be a lot of technology all over the place, that I'm going to be constantly interacting with the old world, and these more primitive societies are going to be just sprinkled lightly throughout. It turns out that it's exactly reverse of that. What's sprinkled lightly is the sci-fi old civilization elements, and what's actually there all the time in the forefront is this new modern primitive element, the tribal element. That is the bulk of the game. So if you're not interested in contending with modern tribal conflicts in this world, then you may lose interest in a lot of what the quest design has to offer. It's not going to be as much sci-fi until the back end that you may want.
Oh, that was subtle.
One thing that holds up really, really well are the graphics in this game. You can already see it for yourself. I'm running Zero Dawn on the PS5. That's 60 frames per second at a 4K resolution. That's possibly an increased visual balance over even the sequel. As Forbidden West, you have to sacrifice frames for resolution or vice versa. Whereas in the PS4 version of Zero Dawn playing on the PS5, you get a full 60 frames, 4K resolution. So that's one of the best things about going back to this, is even though it's an old game, it doesn't feel that old, or it doesn't look that old when you're wandering through its landscape. It remains beautiful. A lot of that beauty comes from the aesthetic choice around color. There's this sci-fi element of the robots and past advanced civilizations that's prominent throughout. And because that sci-fi element exists everywhere you go, at least in sprinkled dots, there is a contrast to the nature that is imposing itself over that. And that fits thematically with the story of the game. Nature has taken over because civilization has ceased to exist for some reason that you'll find out later in the story. So nature here is perpetually living, in a way that's more so than most games. The grass and trees are always swaying, the flowers are practically glowing, life is always on the move, and there's this feeling of an encroaching nature over technology. And the colors, even on the machines, have a kind of visual language to them. There is a state of apprehension to your presence, signaled by the blue lights on the machines. There's a state of aggression, signaled by the yellow and the reds. And this creates an immediate, clear visual language that's quite striking and unique to Horizon Zero Dawn. And it's definitely one of the best parts, having gone back to this game. There's even like synthetic elements in terms of the presentation of the camera. There's a lens flare glint across your screen, as if thrusting you, the player, into a fourth wall reminder of your own artificial relation to this rich, overgrowing world. And this game is all about relations to the world that we're in and the choices that we make in relation to that world. And of course, with such an emphasis on nature, it allows for various biomes to traverse. There's rainforests, swamps, deserts, snow, and all of these spaces invite moments of pause. You can stare out at a vast vista just for the sake of it. And we've moved on in a generation graphically, but a refined aesthetic holds up always, and this game has that aesthetic in spades. Everywhere you go, there is a sunlight glistening through leaves of a tree, and that is worth stopping and staring at.
Look here, a bloody rock.
As for the combat, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Against dinosaur machines, the game is able to balance strategy with reflex. These dinosaurs are not evolved biological creatures. They are designed specifically for effectiveness. And so they're not weakened by having a bony structure on the inside that can be shattered and then you completely destroy their sensitive parts on the outside. It's completely reverse. The armor is on the outside, protecting their delicate insides. And so you as the player have to slowly strip away this protective outer shell to access the weaker innards of these creatures. And so an unusual angle to the combat in terms of how it initially feels is that the rate of damage is exponential. They start off quite strong to your attacks. You're slowly going to be chipping away, and it almost feels like at the beginning of each fight, like, oh, this is going to be a really long battle because the damage is so slow. But as you devastate their armor protection, you are slowly gaining more access to their weak spots, and so it becomes exponentially faster to get through. And that's quite a different style of game. And so you begin to memorize strategies for defeating these creatures. Each creature comes with different body parts on them that have certain weaknesses. Maybe they're weak to fire, or weak to freezing, or weak to electricity or something. Maybe they're prone to being sniped off from afar so that you can use those parts as weaponry. You unlock various firearms by shooting off different parts of the robots' bodies. And so these become strategies for you to destroy each creature. I began to almost memorize how to defeat these beasts over the span of the game. And that is really unique, to have these enemy designs stand out enough that you can actually understand them at a level of, okay, here is how best to deal with them over the span of an entire fight. It makes it feel important. The game is very much balanced around this. You will struggle with some fights, and so it's really about managing your resources, managing your health, and chipping away at those outer elements of the armor. The melee combat, unfortunately, is stilted and practically useless. This is especially obvious during encounters with human enemies, who are themselves the weakest aspect of the combat. Unlike the robots, who have various designs and different ways to strategize around defeating them, humans are just fodder for hits. And so you're running up and you're hitting them a few times, and the combos are quite simplistic, and you're just getting a couple hits off, and then you have to dodge and then get a couple hits off, and maybe you'll be forced to use your bow and arrow and shoot them in the head, but there isn't that much to think about in those combat scenarios. And unfortunately, certain types of activities in this world require you to face off against these sorts of enemies, and it's a huge drab intermission between the grand battles of the machines, and it's definitely the part that holds up the worst. One other oddity of going back to a game that's this old is the feel of the platforming and the feel of the movement. Unlike an Assassin's Creed game or Breath of the Wild or something like that, you can't just climb wherever you want to go. The world is not your oyster. You don't just get to look there and just immediately travel and there you go. It's far more restricted than that. It almost feels like a Tomb Raider or Uncharted. There are specific sequences of traversal broken up by your combat. And the animation style is such that unlike a Dark Souls where it's just like immediate reaction, immediate dodge, immediate attack, there is a slight delay to every action that you're doing. There's a slight delay to your attempt to run in one direction, your attempt to jump or climb or attack. And it's this animation buildup that leads to a delay in response time. And that definitely takes getting used to, and it's going to feel old when you first play it. Now, of course, you can adapt around to that, and that becomes part of your strategy, and it still allows the game to be quite enjoyable, but you're going to have to get used to how heavily animated much of this combat is. As for the open world and the variety of gameplay elements within it, you're often doing just a few things. You're going to talk to people and find out some of the internal politics of whatever town you're visiting, and then that's going to lead to you learning some slight areas to venture off to, but you're not typically doing anything more than wandering to the designated location you're told about and then just scanning the environment a few times, finding what you need to find, and then returning. Maybe you'll have to kill some human characters, and of course, like I said, the human combat is the worst part of the game. Maybe you'll have to hunt some dinosaur creatures, that's the best part of the game, but the structure is still point A to B. There isn't a lot of surprise. There are dungeons in this game, or at least things that are kind of like dungeons. However, what was most disappointing about returning to the game is that these dungeons are few and far between. They're definitely one of the most exciting parts when I initially played it, but there's only a few of them. They're how you end up unlocking your ability to override the robot machines, so they're hugely necessary to your experience as a game player. But with only a few of them, and with their simplistic structure, they're not as engaging as I would have hoped. Unfortunately, these dungeons aren't like Zelda dungeons with various puzzles. What they end up being is stealth sequences with some minor climbing and platforming, and then a big boss at the end. And that happens again and again and again. That gets a little stale. Unfortunately, that's the thing that applies across the board with much of my experience with Zero Dawn, is at this point, a lot of it feels quite stale. And that's going to take some getting used to. Especially if your goal is just to play through so that you can get to Forbidden West. It's going to feel like there's a lot of chore-like work with Zero Dawn. Thankfully, you get to know what the markers are related to in terms of the kinds of activities you can do and the missions that you can take on, so you can mainline if you really want to, and I kind of highly suggest it. One problem is the nature of the resource gathering and progression in this game. You can't always access your mount, so usually in open world games like this, you can mount up on a horse or something equivalent and travel far distances quite quickly. You have to first hijack a mount-like machine in order to make it so that you can traverse in that way. And there are some spaces where there isn't one immediately available, so you're just running on foot. It's a kind of inconvenience built into the design of the game. And additional inconveniences abound. There are a lot of resources you have to gather in order to progress your equipment, and these resources are scattered throughout. There are various twigs and flowers and things and parts of machines, but there's an animation for gathering them, so you're constantly stopping while running to pick up all of these things along the way. It's not like the most recent release Elden Ring where you just get to run past and everything automatically gets picked up just by you pressing triangle. Things are slowed down all the time. It kind of fits the animation of the movement and the combat, where the animation is slowing you down and delaying your actions. It's not immediate. That's definitely going to take getting used to. And of course, you have a skill tree to unlock various things, but the most useful elements of this skill tree are front-ended. You're going to get a lot of the best stuff early on, and then beyond that, it becomes mundane.
You can always come back, but please don't.
As for the story, so this is the part that probably matters the most, because this is why you're going to be playing this game. One of my biggest disappointments from playing this game now is that the bulk of the main story is placed at the very end of the game, or at least after a certain point in the game. There's this major town called Meridian, and once you get there, the main story really starts to unlock. But prior to that point, there isn't a lot of stuff to hold your attention in relation to the grand mystery at the center of the story. And that mystery is around your main character, Aloy, and what her connection to the ancestors are. What is her connection to this technology? And you don't get to learn about a lot of that until much later. And that is hugely disappointing how it's all back-ended in that way. And it makes it so that the experience of going through the story can be understood by just watching videos of maybe the last few hours of gameplay, maybe the last 5 hours or so. You could just watch a compilation video that just strings together all the main revelations at the end of the story and just gives them to you as like a series of scenes, and that would probably be enough. That's really unfortunate. If they had built more of the world around that mystery and orchestrated it in such a way so that those grand story beats were actually woven in between some of the more minor tribal politic elements, I think it would have made for a much more enjoyable and engaging experience.
Before I go, I think I owe it to you to tell you the rest of the story.
My ultimate assessment then of whether or not you should go back and play Zero Dawn, I think there's a lot of fun to be had with the combat and with facing off against the robots, but I do not recommend doing the majority of the side quests. I think that, to be honest, they are just frankly fetch quests and scanning quests and bandit quests. It doesn't hold up very well. If you focus on the main story, you can cut the gameplay time probably in half, and you can get the bulk of what is most interesting about the world, which is the mystery surrounding the past. And once you get that, I do think there is something to be said about the creativity of the robot combat, about the contrast between the synthetic element and the organic, and the ways in which Aloy is a character who's growing and learning through the span of the game. I think that is worth experiencing. It's quite interesting. However, that's if that holds your attention in the first few hours. If not, I don't think it's worth it. Having gone through the whole thing, I don't think it holds up that well. I think Forbidden West is probably best enjoyed if you maybe just mainline the main game. Do not get lagged down in these side quests. That's my recommendation. Alright, so we do video discussions here. Sometimes I do video essays. Maybe I'll do videos like this where I just sort of talk off the cuff about what I think. And if you're interested, we're a growing channel. We're fairly small. It's just me and my brother. Leave a like on this video. Leave a comment, and we definitely will respond. We respond to almost every comment. We definitely read all of the comments. Subscribe if you want to see how we evolve over time. Or if not our channel, check out some other small channels. It's hard to get attention. There's probably a great video out there that you would love. Check it out, give them a like, subscribe to them. But either way, thank you so much for watching, especially for reaching this point in the video. This has been To Games It May Concern. Thanks.